Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Some of you are noticing that this is not a video one. Well, I'm going to be doing another solo episode here, and it's just way easier to not be on camera to do these. For this episode, I'm going to be sharing one of my research papers with you guys, and this one's going to be on the Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism versus Jordan Peterson's Ladder of Abstraction or Ladder of Development. He doesn't really, I don't think he has a name for it, but I kind of gave it those names. This is a guided research paper that I did for Dr. Harold Netland, who has recently been on the podcast. Before we jump in, just want to thank all the Patreon supporters, all the YouTube subscribers, and people leaving me comments over on Apple Podcasts. You guys are awesome. You guys are really making this thing work, and I really, really appreciate it. If you guys like this podcast or have benefited from it, please consider supporting me in those ways, especially Patreon. That would be huge. Recently, many of you, I don't know about many, but some of you have said, hey, we missed the solo episodes. You know, you started this podcast for us, and then you abandoned us by going in so deep with so many philosophers and physicists and stuff. And the whole podcast was supposed to be you bringing stuff down to us in creative and fun ways. Okay. Like, I get it, and I do appreciate that. I didn't know you guys liked me that much. It's really encouraging that you want to hear from me as well as some of the other scholars. So I thought in this episode, I'll just share something that I've recently done with you guys. And so this won't be, I don't know what it'll be. We'll see, I guess. But it'll be maybe a little bit more high level than some of my earlier episodes, but not too much more. It might be a nice intermediary between those and like the recent one on truth, which goes in super deep. So I hope you guys like this one. I won't always do them without the video, but for now, no video. Everyone listening on the podcast, like, what are you talking about? Because we never watch it with video anyways. So let's dive in here. This paper that I'll be reading is called Plantinga and Crisp versus Peterson, How the Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism Kicks the Developmental Ladder Out from Under Jordan Peterson. Yes, it's a mouthful. But it's fun. It's a really fun one. So for those who don't know, Jordan Peterson has become one of the most influential thinkers alive today. His books sell millions of copies. His podcast gets millions of views. His legend grows by the day, and yet very few thinkers have taken up the task of analyzing his more recent academic work. His more foundational academic work, Maps of Meaning. And Peterson actually attributes this work as the foundation for his larger project, or more popular project, which includes his self-help books, 12 Rules for Life and Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. So in this paper, in this podcast, I'll seek to remedy this fact by giving serious attention to and criticism of a central aspect of Peterson's Maps of Meaning, which we will call his Ladder of Development. And I'll do this by pitting the ladder of development against two forms of the Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, or EAN. There's no way to say it. EAAN. I'm not sure what I'll say. We'll see when I come to it. But ultimately, I argue that Peterson's project falls prey to both Tom Crisp's version of EAN as well as Plantinga's final version. So before we can pit EAN against Peterson's ladder of development, we need to get clear on exactly what we're talking about. So an important feature for understanding the ladder of development is to note that Peterson is a Darwinistic evolutionary psychologist. And while he finds much in value in religion, and while it appears that he might be inching closer and closer to affirming the truth of Christianity by the day, fundamentally Peterson's project is to give a naturalistic explanation of religion. And he wants to ground this in Darwinism. But Peterson is not the typical popular level Darwinist who disdains all things religious and mythological. In fact, Peterson has very important roles in his ladder of development for both myth and religion. Peterson carves the world into two different perspectives: a forum for action, which represents the first-person world of value, and the world of things, or the third-person perspective. Peterson says, the world can be validly construed as a forum for action as well as a place of things. We describe the world as a place of things using the formal methods of science. The techniques of narrative, however, myth, literature, and drama, portray the world as a forum for action. The two forms of representation have been unnecessarily set at odds because we have not yet formed a clear picture of their respective domains. The domain of the former is the objective world, what is from the perspective of intersubjective perception. The domain of the latter is the world of value, what is and what should be, from the perspective of emotion and action. So Peterson seeks to unify the two perspectives on the world by way of a synthesis between neuroscience and mythology, with the latter supervening on the former. He says, for it is the case that the human brain and the brain of the higher animals has specialized for operation in the domain of order and the domain of chaos. And it is impossible to understand the fact of this specialization unless those domains are regarded as more than mere metaphor. We live in a universe characterized by the interplay of yang and yin, chaos and order. Emotion provides us with an initial guide when we don't know what we're doing, when reason alone will not suffice. Cognition, by contrast, allows us to construct and maintain our ordered environments and keep chaos and affect in check. Peterson goes on to explicitly naturalize the mythological yin and yang, or order and chaos, as he grounds them in the two hemispheres of the brain. The left hemisphere is associated with order, or yang, and it is apparently responsible for the human organism's operation in explored territory, as Peterson says. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, is associated with chaos, or yin, as it is apparently responsible for the human organism's operation in unexplored territory. Exploration plays a big role for Peterson's theory of thought and abstract thought. If Peterson wants to ground our ability to think in a thoroughly Darwinistic theory, he will need a story which can explain how thinking and abstract thinking would have emerged from the natural progression of evolution. Peterson uses exploration to tell just such a story. He says, thinking might in many cases be regarded as the abstracted form of exploration, as the capacity to investigate without the necessity of direct motoric action. Abstract analysis, verbal and nonverbal, of the unexpected or novel plays a much greater role for humans than for animals, a role that generally takes primacy over action. It is only when this capacity fails partially or completely in humans, or when it plays a paradoxical role, amplifying the significance or potential danger of the unknown through definitive but false negative labeling, that active exploration or active avoidance, with its limitations and dangers, becomes necessary. Replacement of potentially dangerous exploratory action with increasingly flexible and abstracted thought means the possibility for growth of knowledge without direct exposure to danger, and constitutes one major advantage of the development of intelligence. The abstract intelligence characteristic of the human being developed in parallel with rapid evolution of the brain. For Peterson, then, the emergence of human thought was developed in order to aid the human organism in exploring new territory of the world without the risk of actually going out and exploring bodily. Abstract exploration is much less costly than physical exploration and aids in the human endeavor of mapping new territory and creating order out of the chaos of the unknown. From the origins in mapping unexplored territory, and in concert with the rapid evolution of the human brain, the human capacity for abstract thinking and imagination grew more powerfully. With this new power, humans were finally able to abstract moral principles as well as gain other knowledge associated with higher order disciplines. Mankind was finally able to systematically analyze their own behavior, myths, stories, religions, etc., in order to glean practical, moral, and theoretical truths. This brings us at last to Peterson's ladder of development. Peterson recounts the historical evolution of mankind's knowledge as such. Behavior is limited, then abstracted into play, formalized into drama and story, crystallized into myth and codified into religion, and only then criticized in philosophy and provided post hoc with rational underpinnings. Explicit philosophical statements regarding the grounds for and nature of ethical behavior stated in a verbally comprehensive manner were not established through rational endeavor. Thus, as Peterson makes explicit, ethical behavior is not grounded in rational reflection, but in human action as it has been passed down through the generations in various formats. It is only once the human capacity for abstract reasoning was developed that man could reflect back on human behavior and philosophically analyze it. Thus, our know-how knowledge historically predates our know-what or know-that knowledge, i.e. our propositional knowledge. Thus, while we can only know and reflect on our own know-how knowledge system because we have made it explicit through our know-what by a process of abstraction, which was originally purposed for abstract exploration, still our know-how system predates and gives rise to our know-what system. Okay, so Peterson has like this know-what and know-how system, right? So the know-what is propositional knowledge, and the know-how is riding a bike. And so we can abstract out how to ride a bike in propositional form, but only, historically after we've come to learn how to ride a bike just by doing it. So that's just a little aside here for those getting lost here. So Peterson says, the knowing what system, declarative, episodic, and semantic, has developed a description of knowing how activity, procedure, through a complex, lengthy process of abstraction. Action and imitation of action developmentally predate explicit description of discovery or of the rules governing action. Adaptation through play and drama preceded development of linguistic thought and provided the ground for which it emerged. Each developmental stage, action, imitation, play, ritual, drama, narrative, myth, religion, philosophy, rationality, offers an increasingly abstracted, generalized, and detailed representation of the behavioral wisdom embedded in and established during the previous stage. The introduction of semantic representation to the human realm of behavior allowed for continuance and ever-increasing extension of the cognitive process originating in action, imitation, play, and drama. Language turned drama into mythic narrative, narrative into formal religion, and religion into critical philosophy, providing for exponential expansion of adaptive ability. Okay, so again, to summarize, Peterson has this ladder of development, which starts because humans want to explore the world without actively going out and risking. So you can sit in your armchair and you can think about the world and you can explore it with your mind, and you can debate on how well we can do with that. But that was the action which gave rise to abstract thought. And so then once we have this abstract thought, we can start thinking about the process of humanity, how we got to where we're at. And we can start looking at the myths that we've inherited and saying, is there actually truth here? Well, for Peterson, especially because he's a pragmatist, yeah, of course there's truth, because truth is that which helps us survive. And so if these myths have helped us survive, let's analyze that with abstract thought, which we have because of our ancestors wanting to explore territory without moving their bodies there, but by using their minds to do it. Okay, now we have this tool. We could abstract out new ideas from myth and ritual and drama, narrative and religion, all the way up to philosophical inquiry. Okay, so that's where we're at. With this addition of language, the pace towards the ability to explicitly analyze our history and our inherited wisdom and knowledge, this increased exponentially. With the necessary tool of abstract reasoning finally at our disposal, mankind has finally reached the point of critical philosophy and can now scrutinize and explicitly abstract know-what knowledge out of our know-how knowledge. Okay, so with this picture of Peterson's ladder of development, we can now move to drive a wedge between the know-what and the know-how knowledge of Peterson's project. So now we're going to get into Thomas Crisp's Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, We're going to apply it to Peterson's ladder of development. Now, again, before we jump in here, the ladder of development moves through these different stages, and I've called it a ladder. I think he might have said that too, but it's got these different rungs, these different stages, and it starts with action. And then we have imitation, so someone imitating someone else's action. Then we have play. Then we have ritual. Then we have drama. Then we have narrative. Then we have myth. Then we have religion. Then we have philosophy, and then rationality. And I'm not sure how rationality is on top there. Maybe he said that he's rewritten every sentence in this book like 3 or 4 times, and it took him 10 years to write it. So he means what he says there. So that's the ladder of development. And we're going to see if we can't break off a couple rungs there and help Peterson come back around our way. So first up against Peterson's ladder of development is Tom Crisp's Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism. And it might be unfair to call it that, but it really is. It's like Plantinga's argument, except it is directed towards metaphysical beliefs instead of all of our beliefs. So it's a weaker form than Alvin Plantinga's in that it grants the naturalist lower level reasoning capacities, such as inference the best explanation, and it merely targets our abstract metaphysical beliefs. So in setting up his objection to abstract naturalistic metaphysics, Crisp lists 3 important theses which we will apply to Peterson's ladder of development. First up, the evolutionary thesis. And this goes like this. If naturalism is true, if there is no need to appeal to God or anything like God in explaining or understanding the world, then it is highly likely that we humans and our cognitive faculties are the product of unguided evolutionary process of the sorts described by contemporary evolutionary theory. Okay, so that's the evolutionary thesis. This thesis certainly applies to Peterson's ladder of development, as he wishes to ground his entire project in neuroscience without appeal to God or anything like God. Indeed, to conceive of God arises historically in the ladder of development. Next up, the second premise, we have our principle, the principle of reason. If, for some source of information S, you have good reason to doubt the reliability of S, and have no good reason to discount this reason for doubt, then the rational attitude toward matters about which S is your only source of information is doubt. Let me read that again because I botched it. If, for some source of information F, you have good reason to doubt the reliability of S, and have no good reason to discount this reason for doubt, then the rational attitude toward matters about which S is your only source of information is in doubt. Okay, so that's the principle of reason, and this principle is pretty straightforward. There's nothing specific to Peterson's project which would cause him to reject this principle of reason. And then thirdly, the thesis of unreliability. The probability that we humans command much by way of reliable insight into abstract and metaphysical matters, given naturalism, and that we and our faculties are the product of evolutionary process of the sort described by evolutionary theory, is inscrutable. That is, we have no way of knowing its value. Okay, so if we are the product of evolutionary processes, just naturalistic evolutionary processes, then we have no way of knowing if our cognitive faculties are reliable. It's inscrutable. There's no way to know its value. Now, this last thesis is the one which needs the most treatment. So before we seek to apply this thesis of unreliability to Peterson's ladder of development, it's important to establish that the ladder of development is an abstract metaphysical matter. Here, Crisp's definition of naturalistic metaphysics is helpful. Naturalistic metaphysics, Crisp says, is metaphysics such that the structures that it postulates to explain the appearances are populated entirely by natural entities, forces, and processes. Entities, forces, and processes completely describable without appeal to mind or minds, whose activities explain the origin, structure, and ongoing existence of the cosmos. And such is the project of explaining the mental, the moral, and the physical in naturalistic terms, naturalistic metaphysics. It's the attempt to get behind the mental, the moral, and physical appearances to understand the nature and structure of the realities underlying them, and all the while postulating only natural entities, forces, and processes. And as it occurs in the pages of philosophical and scientific journals and books, it's most highly abstract metaphysics. So surely under Crisp's definition above, Peterson's ladder of development is, in fact, an exercise in naturalistic metaphysics. But why think that the thesis of unreliability ought to apply to the ladder of development? Well, as we've noted above, Peterson grounds or originates the abstract reasoning required for reasoning about metaphysics, such as the ladder of development, in early man's abstract exploration. Now, in keeping with Crisp's desiderata, we might grant Peterson the abstract exploration, perhaps that is plausible given the evolutionary account of our faculties. It seems plausible that saving oneself the risk of bodily exploration through using your mind to engage in abstract exploration has various survival benefits. It might even make sense that our ancestors' faculties, which produced abstract exploration, were generally reliable. But why think that those same faculties would be able to generally arrive at truth in regards to abstruse metaphysical matters like the ladder of development itself? What possible story could Peterson give for the necessity of our ancestors to reliably produce true beliefs about metaphysics? Perhaps Peterson would argue that the capacity to arrive at generally reliable metaphysical beliefs is a spandrel, i.e. a non-adaptive byproduct of some adaptively selected trait, just as, for example, reliability on abstract mathematical matters is plausibly thought of as a non-adaptive byproduct of the adaptive ability to do simple arithmetic. Now, that's quoting Crisp. But how could we ever determine the probability that the cognitive faculties which evolved specifically for the abstract exploration needed to map new territory would reliably be producing true metaphysical beliefs? As Chris points out, the probability is inscrutable, and thus, since the probability is inscrutable, it could easily be a 0% chance that the faculties which evolved for abstract exploration also produce generally reliable metaphysical beliefs. Thus, we have no reason to believe that our cognitive faculties can produce reliable metaphysical beliefs as a spandrel from abstract exploration. So that thing that Peterson grounds all of our reasoning in, this abstract exploration, there's no reason to think that that would lead us to truth in our metaphysical beliefs. And Peterson's whole project is about metaphysical beliefs. The whole ladder of abstraction is certainly that. It's certainly naturalistic explanation of metaphysics, of the world. And so do we start to see the self-defeat here? On his own project, we can't know the scrutability, or our reasoning is inscrutable. We don't know how accurate it would be given his own premises. So in the absence of a good reason to affirm a spandrel, we have a good reason to doubt that our ancestors needed to produce reliable metaphysical beliefs, i.e. that abstract metaphysical beliefs can be widely mistaken without affecting the survival of the species whatsoever. Just read any history of philosophy book. I mean, people were wrong about metaphysics all the time, and yet they still continue to survive. And so on a naturalistic metaphysics, we have a reason to doubt that our cognitive faculties reliably produce true abstract metaphysical beliefs, of which the ladder of development is one. Thus, following the intuitive principle of reason, we have a reason to doubt the ladder of development given the truth of the ladder of development. So if the ladder of development is true, we should doubt that it is true. If it is false, then we should not believe it. So that's how I think Peterson's project falls prey to Tom Crisp's Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, which focuses on metaphysical beliefs. And, of course, the ladder of development is a metaphysical belief. So we've granted that maybe there's some lower level reasoning capacities that are still fine, that could be, spandrels, could be whatever. It could be reliable on evolutionary theory, naturalistic evolutionary theory. But once you get up to the higher abstruse metaphysical beliefs, No, we have no reason to think that they would be reliably produced. And so then we have no reason to think the ladder of development itself has been reliably produced. Boom. So now we go on to Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism versus the ladder of development. So while Crisp's EAANs served as a local skeptical threat targeted solely against abstract metaphysical beliefs, Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism is a global skeptical threat which seeks to threaten all of the naturalist beliefs by demonstrating that on the conjunction of naturalism and evolution, the probability that our cognitive faculties would be reliable is low. Plantinga's most mature argument runs as follows. 1. The probability that our senses are reliable on naturalism and evolution is low. 2. Anyone who accepts, believes NNE, and sees that the probability of R on NNE, the reliability of our senses is R on NNE, is low, they have a defeater for the reliability of their senses. 3. Anyone who has a defeater for the reliability of their senses has a defeater for any other belief she thinks she has, including naturalism and evolution itself. 4. If one who accepts NNE thereby acquires a defeater for NNE, NNE can't be rationally accepted. So for our present purposes, we will not go into detail about 1 through 4, but accept that the argument is sound for the sake of argument. If it can be shown that Peterson's ladder of development falls prey to Plantinga's EAAN, it will be on someone else to come along and argue against the soundness of EAAN. It's been debated a ton. My goal in this section is merely to show why one is true for the ladder of development and then follow it through to self-defeat. So why should we think that the probability that our rational faculties is low on the ladder of development? Well, remember back to Peterson's quote from earlier. Behavior is imitated, then abstracted into play, formalized into drama and story, crystallized into myth, and codified into religion, and only then criticized in philosophy and provided post hoc with rational underpinnings. Explicit philosophical statements regarding the grounds for and nature of ethical behavior stated in a verbally comprehensible manner were not established through rational endeavor. Okay, crazy. So on Peterson's conception, the rational faculties are produced by a long string of non-rational processes, which itself is only later given a post hoc or ad hoc rational justification. If this non-rational process of the ladder of development led to the survival and thriving during its non-rational stages, like why think that it would ever need to produce reliably true beliefs? Apparently, it doesn't matter what kind of beliefs were produced by the non-rational portion of the ladder of development. True or false, the beliefs help the species get their bodies in the right places to survive. Now, if this is the process which supposedly gave rise to our cognitive faculties, a process aimed at survival rather than truth, why think that our cognitive faculties would ever reliably produce true beliefs when whatever beliefs it was producing in the earlier portion of the ladder successfully led to survival? The truth of the matter, like the truth itself, it's hard to come by. There's one answer to the equation 2 + 2 =, right? And it's 4. But there's an untold number of false answers which might be just close enough for survival. Why think that the ladder of development would ever produce faculties that reliably produce truth? Any true beliefs produced by such a set of cognitive faculties would be true by accident and thus wouldn't constitute knowledge. Thus, we have a large wedge between Peterson's know-how knowledge and know-what knowledge. Given the ladder of development, then, the probability that our cognitive faculties reliably produce true beliefs is low. All that's left to do now is plug in the ladder of development into the equation. So, 1, the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable on the ladder of development, it's low. 2, anyone who accepts or believes that the ladder of development is true or is the way that we got here and sees that the probability of irrational faculties being reliable on the ladder of development is low, has a defeater for the rational faculties, the reliability of the rational faculties. 3, anyone who has a defeater for the rational faculties, the reliability of the rational faculties, has a defeater for any other belief she thinks she has, including the ladder of development itself. If one who accepts the ladder of development thereby acquires the defeater for the ladder of development, then the ladder of development can't rationally be accepted. Thus, as we have sought to demonstrate, Peterson's ladder of development, which resides at the heart of his project, is self-defeating on at least 2 counts. Whether on Crisp's localized skeptical threat or on Plantinga's global skeptical threat, Peterson's ladder of development cannot be rationally affirmed. Okay, so let's sum that all up. It's hard reading it, and it was hard probably listening to it, but let's sum it up. So Peterson's whole project can be summed up in looking at the world as a forum for action and a place of things. Okay, cool. We got that. Now, when it comes to looking at the world either way, through our cognitive faculties, through our reason, Peterson finds this ladder of development central. We started with action, and then we moved to imitation and play and ritual, and we move all the way up through religion even to philosophy and to rationality. And it's only once we get to the top that our cognitive faculties are such that we can reflect back on the rest of the ladder and abstract out moral lessons, scientific truths, like everything that we come to think of now. It's only once we get to the top that we can do this. And this is pretty uncontroversial for an evolutionary theorist. Like that's the evolution of us. That's what they say. So Peterson's ladder is something that he uses in order to continue to bolster myth and religion, because he says there's still truths there. Those truths, they aided us in our development, in climbing. It was an important stage or rung on the developmental ladder, so we can't throw the baby out with bathwater. Sure, yeah, we can't take it literally, but there's still truths there, so we still have a place for religion and for myth. Okay. So Peterson will use that against people like Sam Harris in order to say, hey, look, you're throwing off the underpinnings of our whole society, because this ladder of development is what holds us up. So don't do that. We need to still have a place for religion and myth. And the world as a forum for action is actually more important than the world as a place for things. Yeah, sure, science and stuff is important, but we still need morality. Okay, Peterson, I get you, man. I'm with you. However, I think that in having such a naturalistic evolutionary theory, you produced a self-defeating project, right? So why think that our metaphysical beliefs would be produced by reliable faculties? Like, why think that us as humans should be able to think clearly and reliably about metaphysics, the things that undergird our physics, the thing beyond physics? Why think that? And if you don't have a good reason to think that, then you don't have a good reason to think that the ladder of development is how we got here. But that's your whole explanation for how we got here. So if that's the case, it's either inscrutable or self-defeating. It eats itself like a snake eating its own tail, which Peterson loves talking about. That's chaos, man. Your whole system is reduced to chaos if it's true, because you have no reason in there to think that our abstract metaphysical beliefs are a spandrel of reason, are produced by accident. The tide raises all ships, and so does our metaphysical capacities for reasoning. No, they don't. Like, why? But even more so, if we go to Plantinga's version, why think that any of our beliefs would be reliable? Like, why think that our cognitive faculties produce truth reliably at all? Because, as you said, this whole process was not guided by reason. So if it was guided, we're opening up the door for C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. So if our beliefs are produced by non-rational causes, like, we have to cry halt. What are you talking about? There's no reason for your belief, then you're not justified in your belief. Like, why do you believe that? Well, because I was caused to believe that. Well, were you caused by reason, or were you caused by something that was non-rational? And if it's non-rational, then I would say that's not justified. Like, if I had a brain lesion and it caused me to form a belief, would that be a rational belief? Would that be a justified belief? No, it's produced by a non-rational cause. But Peterson's whole project is produced. He has our beliefs being shaped and molded, our cognitive faculties shaped and molded, and our beliefs produced by this cognitive faculty, system, which is shaped by non-rational causes. There's no telos here. It's not that they've been designed by God through evolutionary, through theistic evolution, but it's that it was a cosmic accident, and they produced our cognitive faculties. And yeah, we can reason about abstract metaphysical beliefs and every other kind of belief, and that's fine. I don't think so. I think that Crisp's and Plantinga's arguments actually cut off the ladder of development. So I don't see any reason to think that we would be able to reason properly, reliably about abstract metaphysical beliefs, nor about any of our beliefs if what Peterson says about the ladder of development is true. If we've been produced by a non-rational process, then why think that we can know truth reliably at all? Abstract, metaphysical, or even about my car in the driveway. Like, why think that? Instead of thinking that we have truth, why not think that we have beliefs that help us survive? And after all, Peterson is a pragmatist, and really, in his conversation with Sam Harris, he does end up saying that truth is what helps us survive. And so I wonder if he would just accept that and say, yeah, these two arguments do show that we don't have truth in like a correspondence theory type way, but we have truth in a pragmatic way, i.e. that those beliefs that help us survive just are true. And I think this is just plainly wrong. So if a frog had beliefs and a frog thought that eating a bunch of dragonflies would help him turn into a frog prince, well, that's not true. That's not a true belief. It's a false belief, but it will help him survive. So it's survivally advantageous or something, right? So as long as he continues eating those dragonflies, he'll continue surviving, he'll pass on his genes, blah, blah, blah. But it's a false belief. It doesn't correspond to reality. It's not going to turn him into a frog prince. So if you say on a pragmatic theory of truth that that is true because it helps him survive, then that's bonkers to me. That doesn't make any sense to me. No, his belief is false. If he keeps eating those dragonflies, he will not turn into a frog prince, but he will survive. And so I think that's a major problem with the pragmatic theory of truth, which I think is a major problem for Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning and his ladder of development. So I want to hear from you guys. And maybe this was a bad one. Maybe I shouldn't read my papers anymore. But if you like this one, please let me know, and I'll read you some more papers. I got a ton of them from grad school, which I recently graduated from. I did 2 masters at Trinity, and so I have just a ton of papers I'd love to read for you guys. But if I need to abstract out more details and do it in a more conversational way instead of reading it, let me know that as well. Just drop a comment, whatever. Get a hold of me. You guys know how to do it. This has been Parker's Pensées. Hopefully we can talk about this more, but for now, it's going to have to do it. And as always, all glory to God.